Yes, Mr. Blake.
Thank you. So can we call Mr. Holmes, please?
Yeah.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you give your full name, please?
Yes, it's Jan Robert Holmes.
Mr. Holmes, you should have in front of you a hard copy of a witness statement.
Yep.
And is that dated the 3rd of September of this year?
Yes, it is.
Yes, and could I ask you to turn to page 18, please? Is that your signature at the bottom?
Yes, it is.
And is that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming today. As you're aware, I'm asking questions on behalf of the inquiry. I'm going to start by asking just about yourself. You began your career in the civil service, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. In the mid-70s, I started programming and did some work programming operations management, and then moved into computer audit in the early 80s.
And I think you worked for a few small IT companies for a period.
Subsequent to that, yes.
And then in 1995, you joined ICL Financial Services Division in Wilmslow.
Yes, that's correct.
In 1997, you transferred to ICL Pathway in the role that we're going to hear about as audit manager.
Well, this is where I have to diverge from here a bit. I actually realised that I joined late 1996 in a slightly different capacity, but it didn't go for very long, and then I was transferred into this role as audit manager in 1970, so that first bit can be discounted, I think.
Do you remember what the 1996 post was at all?
Yeah, it was a process engineer, I think.
Thank you. And then you left that role briefly, the audit manager role, and I think you then came back and returned to the role.
Yeah, in May 1970, I left to join a central ICL project called Propel, which collapsed in middle of 2001. Nothing to do with me, but and then I came back to the programme until about 2008.
Sorry, when did you leave?
I think it was about May 2000.
2000, thank you. You retired in 2008, is that right?
No, I didn't retire. I left the programme and then was made redundant the following year.
Yes.
And then did some sort of consultancy work until I finished work in about 2015.
Thank you very much. Just as a matter of transparency, in preparing for this inquiry, I think you confirmed with me that you had spoken to Terry Austin. Yeah,
I have to. I mean, I've known Terry since we started in the civil service because we were in it at the same time. So I know him as a friend as well as a work colleague. And in fact, it was Terry who steered me into Pathway in 96, 97.
Thank you. And I think you may have spoken to one or two other people. Is that right?
Yes, I did, but nobody who's involved with this.
Thank you. When you began your role as audit manager, you have described the audit function as being immature. What do you mean by that?
Well, to all intents and purposes, it was a standing start. What happened was when I came in as process engineer, I was doing sort of that kind of work. And then it became clear that because of the volume of audit information and data that was going to be collected and what was expected of it through the requirements, there was a need to take a more active management role in it. Also, the fact that because I'd been through the Institute of Internal Auditors training, along with a whole raft of other civil servants, it was a result of a National Audit Office initiative. It meant that there was consistency in approach between what I would be doing and what the Post Office and the Benefits Agency will be doing as well. The idea being that we could work a bit more harmoniously because we had the same expectations of standards and practice and what have you. So in terms of the audit function with regard to the data and the trails, yes, that was a standing start because they were just being developed. And in terms of the internal audit side, that was a new function that I was asked to put in place to interface and work with Benefits Agency and the Post Office. Thank you. And the broader team that your role fell into, that was the Quality and Risk Management Group, is that right? Yes, that's correct, under Martin Bennett, who was on the senior management team. And do you remember who else was on the senior management team? The senior management team? Yes. John Bennett ran it. Liam Foley was the business development director, Tony Oppenheim, the financial director. Terry Austin, I think at the time, was on the board as the program director. And I think there was an HR guy as well, John Hobson.
Were you aware of how it worked, that senior management team? Did it have regular meetings, for example?
I believe so, yes.
Did you attend any of those meetings?
No.
Do you feel that you had enough support in your position from the board or from the senior management?
Yes, I do. I mean, it's not often when you set up an audit department that you get the level of support that you want. You often have to fight your corner to get heard and listened to and taken seriously. But I have to say that on this account, this project, it was pretty good. Visibility was good to the senior management team through reports and corrective actions. Martin was quite vociferous in supporting the role in his position as my boss. So I was quite comfortable with it compared to some I'd been in, where internal audit was the unfortunate noise in the corner.
At paragraph 14 of your witness statement, you have listed 3 audits that you consider that of most importance to the inquiry. There's no need to go to it in the statement unless you'd like to. You described the CSR Plus development audit, the EPOS task force report, and the implementation audit. I'm going to take them in chronological order just to remind ourselves of what each one of those are, although we have heard quite a bit already this morning. Can we look at FUJ 000-80690? That is the EPOS Pinnacle Task Force report that we have seen a lot about this morning, and it talks about the task force carrying out its work in the summer and autumn of 1998. I'm going to ask you shortly about the various dates of the reports, but perhaps we can just turn to page 7 for this purpose, just to remind us of what it says. There's a key section there about the EPOS code, and it says there, it highlights code decay through fixes, for example, pinnacles likely to increase, and poor workmanship. Do you agree with that? Is that a fair summary of what it says there?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. And was that something you agreed with at the time? I mean, you wrote the report. Presumably that was your view?
Yeah, I mean, just to put these things in context, though, just for a minute. Audit reports are, by virtue of their nature, snapshots in time. Okay? So when you go in to do an audit, you go in and look at the evidence as it is over that 1 or 2 week period that you're doing the work. You then take that away, you sit and look at it and think about it, have conversations with other people, and then you draw conclusions, and you ask yourself, well, if this were to continue, what could go wrong? And that's when you start putting forward the scenarios of code decay and problems coming up in the future. You're trying to contextualize what you found into what potentially could happen if this was allowed to go on. Code decay could easily become an issue, but I'm not in a position to say in 1998 what that issue might be in the long term.
But you're looking forward there, predicting likely future problems?
Yes, in that context I am, yeah.
And then we'll look at the CSR Plus audit. That's FUJ 000-79782, please. I should say that the first one, I think, was distributed to a similar distribution list, Martin Bennett being your manager.
Yeah.
I think he received all of these reports, but we can have a look at that. This was the summer and autumn 99. And can we look, we've looked at this already this morning, but let's look at page 20, please. This paragraph we looked at just shortly before lunch. It says, the figures indicate that the problems facing EPOS during the task force period have not diminished. Of greater concern are the non-EPOS pinnacles within the group, suggesting that there are still serious quality problems in this vital customer-facing element of the system. So I think you've just said that in relation to the report on the task force, you were making some predictions or looking to likely future events.
Yeah.
this is somewhat later, and it looks as though those events have been realised.
Correct, and that's supported by the evidence in the table that sits above it.
And then it goes on, it says the EPOS Solutions report made specific recommendations to consider the redesign and rewrite of EPOS, in part or in whole, to address the then known shortcomings. In light of the continued evidence of poor product quality, these recommendations should be reconsidered. Can you tell us, do you remember what the EPOS Solutions report was?
No, unfortunately, this is a lost document. I can't find it in my own personal archive, and it looks like you haven't been able to find it either. But it was written as a follow-up to the task force report. I'm almost certain Dave MacDonald wrote it as a technical report as opposed to an audit report. But I just don't know what happened to it, where it's gone.
We have a note of it being dated the 21st of September 1999. Mm-hmm. Does that fit with your recollection? What, of
the solutions report?
Yes.
Quite possibly.
Yes. I mean, do you remember in broad terms what it may have said?
No, I think it may well have just gone into more technical detail about what we found in the EPOS report, what we reported in a sort of more general managerial type sense as opposed to a deep technical sense. Because you've got to bear in mind, I'm not a technician. So the bits in that report and the EPOS task report that were technical, I had to get contributions from people like Dave.
So we've seen in the EPOS Pinnacle Task Force report some pretty frank language there. Yep. For example, whoever wrote this code clearly has no understanding of elementary mathematics or the most basic rules of programming. Yep. Is the EPOS Solutions report likely to have addressed that at a more technical level? Quite possibly, yes. So would its findings be consistent with the EPOS Pinnacle Task Force? Yes. And then the third document that you've referred to is the implementation audit, and that is at FUJ 000797888, please. And that's around the same time, so we're looking at summer, autumn 1999. Again, if we scroll down, this went to Martin Bennett. It went to yourself. You didn't actually write this report. Is that right?
No, that's right. Stanley Loam did.
Yes. And then if we look at page 5, there's the management summary. And thank you very much. I don't think we need to read the management summary in depth, but would it be fair to say that there were some criticisms there focusing on lack of processes and procedures and documentation in certain areas?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Thank you very much. That can be taken down. All of those 3 reports that you've mentioned as most significant for this inquiry, am I right in saying that they all went to senior management of ICL Pathway?
With the exception of the EPOS task force, no, that had a very restricted distribution. And the reason for that being, Terry commissioned that piece of work because he wanted to know what was going on. So therefore, when I did the work through the task force, the report went to Terry and it was up to him what he did with it. It wasn't, to my mind, it wasn't a general distribution document.
But it did go to Mr. Bennett as well.
Well, as my boss, yes.
Yes. And were you aware of him raising it with senior management, the people that we've discussed?
No, not aware of that.
Do you think it was likely or unlikely that it would be discussed?
I really don't know. I can't comment.
And what about sharing with the post office? Are you aware of any of those 3 documents or their substance being shared with the post office?
No, it would be highly unlikely if audit reports were shared with the post office. I think in keeping with most audit departments, the reports are for management use and purpose. If they choose to share them, that's up to them. But as an auditor, I'm not at liberty to just distribute reports willy-nilly.
And to the best of your recollection in relation to those 3 reports, were they shared?
Not to my knowledge.
No.
Before Mr. Blake goes on, I'm sorry I missed a detail. You did tell us who you thought might have authored the implementation report, and I missed it.
Sorry, his name was Stanley Loam, L-O-A-M.
Loam,
yeah.
Thank you.
He was employed as an auditor at the time.
Fine, thanks very much. Sorry, Mr. Blake.
Not at all. Would he have fallen underneath your level? Were you his manager, or were you on the same level? Do you remember?
No, I mean, yes, organisationally he sat below me on a chart, but, you know, we worked as equals.
I'm going to move on and concentrate on that Pinnacle task force. I just want to see if you can help us at all with this document, this date issue that we've been looking at this morning. It may be that you're not, but let me take you to the documents and see where we get to. Let's look at FUJ 000-80690. So this is the main one that we've been working from. And you'll see there, it's called version 1.0, and it's dated 2001. But we know, of course, that the task force itself took place in 1998. Can we now look at FUJ 00121-098? This is a version that Mr. Beer took Mr. MacDonald to. That is referred to as, in the top right-hand corner, version 0.1, with a date of the 16th of February of 2000. And then if we go to FUJ 000-79782, and can we go to page 2 of this? This is the CSR Plus Development Audit. If we look at page 2 and we scroll down page 2, it refers to associated documents there. Could we scroll down? And if you look at item number 6, it has their IA REP/008 version 0.3 dating back to the 29th of September 1998, report on EPOS Pinnacle Task Force. And it might be worth noting, just for the record, at paragraphs at number 7 below, there is a reference there to the document that we can't find, which is the report on EPOS solutions. Are you able to help us at all about these various dates and versions?
Okay, well, version 0.1 that's dated the September 98. Yeah?
98? Or?
Yeah, the first version, 0.1,
yes.
98, was the report that I wrote in the first place. Okay? Version 1, if you notice in the document history section, it says move to 1 as an admin exercise. That was just to move it up to version 1 to get it out of draft. That was all. That was me. I did that. I don't think there weren't any changes to it at that time. It was just me moving it forward. 0.3, I can only assume that some work had been done on the document up to 0.3 later in September 98, and that would have been sat in PVCS, which was the document repository. So you got 0.1.
0.1 seems to be dated 2000 rather than 1998.
Can you show me?
Yes, that is FUJ 00121-098. If it helps, it was just the document we saw just before. Thanks. So in the top right-hand corner there.
Yeah, I don't. I sort of don't recognise that as a date that corresponds to the version.
And if we go back to the FUJ 000-80690, and that's the first one that I took you to, and it's the one that we've been working off, you've had time to consider that document. Do you consider that that is the original version that you authored?
Yes, yeah.
So you're not aware of any substantive changes at all?
Well, no, not unless I made them, and I wouldn't know what they are at this now. But there would be nobody else who would have updated that document.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to 2000. Can we look at WITN 046000104, please? Thank you. Now, in your statement, it's page 6, paragraph 9F, we don't need to go to it, but you say that you had concerns that continual change of EPOS code would generate instability, and that's something we've heard this morning as well.
Yes.
Having written the original report, the EPOS task force report, like Mr. McDonnell, were you particularly concerned about the EPOS product?
Probably not in the same way that he was. I was concerned from the point of view of its impact and effect on the remainder of the programme. Whereas he was, I think, particularly interested in EPOS as the product, because he was that person at that time. My concern was just more of a general, the state of the programme moving forward, if it's got unstable or products that don't work sat in it.
And did you have a significant concern about that?
Well, define significant. I mean, it's...
On your list of concerns, how high up was the EPOS? How high up the
scale
one?
is significant? Yeah, I would say it was significant, yeah.
This document schedules the response to certain corrective actions.
Yeah.
And can we look at page 9, please? We have seen this morning, so I can probably take it quite quickly.
Yeah, now I noticed this morning, sorry if I can just say, when you were talking to Dave, you stopped at the bottom of page 9. There is more to this corrective action overleaf.
Yes, there are actually 2 versions of this document. One is an earlier version.
Yeah.
This is the later version, which if we'll scroll on in a minute, and it will have the full detail, and I will definitely take you to that. Let's start at this page, though. On the left-hand side, it says that the audit identified that EPOS continues to be unstable. Pinnacle evidence illustrated the numbers of pinnacles raised since the 1998 task force and the rate of their being raised. We're talking here May 2000, although this document is a document that keeps on getting updated, isn't it? So it dates back at least before November 1999, because that's November at the top. 17th of November is the first entry on this particular page.
Yeah, in fact, the 17th of November is the first entry for all of the actions, which is where I had the original discussions with Mike Holmes to agree or disagree with the proposed action, or the proposed recommendation, sorry, and therefore what was to be done about it. So that's why all the initial entries for this are dated the 17th of November.
Thank you very much. And on that left-hand side, it refers again to the EPOS Solutions report.
Yeah.
So presumably you would have seen that EPOS Solutions report at that time.
Yeah, I guess so.
And it refers to the poor product quality and the recommendation that it should be reconsidered. And this is the follow-up. If we look at the 25th of November 1999, there's the email that we heard about this morning from Terry Austin about not formally closing it down. Mm-hmm. And is it right to say that he asks you, essentially, can we close this down?
Yes, he did.
And why would he be asking you?
Because I suspect in his opinion he felt that the explanation he'd provided was sufficient to warrant closure. It becomes a bit of a judgment call. If you don't have any objective closure criteria, then you can't say, yeah, you've done that, so close it off. It's more an agreement between people and groups.
Yes, because this was a recommendation that it should be reconsidered rather than it has to be done, and therefore, if it had been a recommendation that it needed to be done, presumably you couldn't close it until it was done.
Well, to be fair, a recommendation is always only ever that, isn't it, a recommendation? I mean, you can recommend that it is rewritten, full stop. If that's not taken by the organisation, there's not a lot you can do about it.
Yeah. And then, shall we scroll down, because then we see what happens after that. The 8th of December, JH, we've heard that's you. Do you agree?
Yeah.
Yes. So Jan Holmes requested statistics on fixes delivered to live from RM. Now, there was a suggestion that was release management. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Also informed TPA, Terry Austin, that requires agreement of MJBC, that's Mr. Coombs.
Mike Coombs, yeah.
Before this can be closed. Can you tell us about that entry?
Yeah, I wasn't prepared to accept Terry's request on the strength of what he'd said. So all I wanted to get, I wanted to get some further information about Pinnacle numbers and fixes, and I wanted to involve Mike in the closure as he was the program director. Terry at that time was just the systems director.
Is the background to that those reports that we've seen that were quite critical, and are we to infer from that that you saw it as something that needed quite a great deal of scrutiny?
Yes, yeah.
The next entry, Mr. Coombs confirmed that unless RM statistics contradicted reports provided by PJ, that's Mr. Jerram, I think.
Pete Jerram, yeah.
The recommendation could be closed. And then the 7th, well, let's stop there. What was going on there?
Well, the way that was written, I was waiting for that information to come forward to move the corrective action along. But clearly nothing was happening. This information was not forthcoming from wherever, release management or from Pete. So that's why in April I tried to force the issue by providing the information that I was waiting for. I know that sounds a bit peculiar, but sometimes you have to do it that way in order to elicit a response.
So we have there your entry of the 7th of April, and that's email presumably from you then to Mr. Coombs, Mr. Austin and Mr. Jerram, providing details of release management EPOS fixes to live, asked for confirmation that matched PJ, that's Mr. Jerram's reports. If does, then we'll close. What were Mr. Jerram's reports that are referred to there?
I think as the, let's see, Pete was a release manager, I think, at that time. So he was in his role as release manager, obtaining reports of the status of errors and pinnacles and what have you. Now, it's a bit moot because I think the source of both of those pieces of information was the same report. So the release management report was in fact the same report that was going to Pete, so that he knew what was going on. I don't know that for sure, but I think that was the case.
So it seems as though you've obtained details directly from release management.
Yeah.
Which are likely to be exactly the same as Mr. Jerram's figures, or not?
Quite possibly, but the issue here was trying to get the thing closed, as opposed, because it could just have stayed open for, months and months and months more.
And how were you able to obtain that information?
I probably asked for them.
And in, say, the 8th of December of 1999, presumably Mr. Jerram could also have asked for them.
I believe so, yes.
Would he have had access to them as of right? Would he have had to ask somebody? Would they be emailed to him?
No, I don't know whether he would have to request them or whether he got them.
And I think we're going to come to it, but I'm interested in why it may have taken so long to respond to you on this occasion. Let's look at the May entry. There's the 3rd of May, reminder email sent to above seeking early response, chased on the same day. So again, is that you chasing a response?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's perhaps a little indicative of the fact that sometimes you do, as an auditor, you do have to chase management to actually do their end of the deal. So that was a bit disappointing that it took from December through to May and involved reminders to get things done.
And then I'll just read that final entry. So this is the response from Mr. Coombs. We've heard it before, but just for the purpose of the record and to refresh your memory, it says, as discussed, this should be closed. Effectively, as a management team, we have accepted the ongoing cost of maintenance rather than the cost of a rewrite. The reference to management team, is that the same as the management team that we discussed at the beginning of your evidence? Or
I believe so, yes.
Rewrites of the product will only be considered if we need to reopen the codes to introduce significant changes in functionality. We'll continue to monitor the code quality based on product defects. As we progress through the final passes of testing and the introduction of the modified CI4 code set into live usage in the network, PJ, Mr. Jerem, can we make sure this is specifically covered in our reviews of the B and TC test cycles? Did management ever go back to you after that occasion to say that they had made a mistake or that they were still reviewing?
No.
Would you have
once it's
expected
closed,
them?
it's closed.
Now, I'm going to just take you to a couple of documents that I know you've been following this inquiry, so you will have seen these documents put to other witnesses. I'll just briefly look at them. Can we look at FUJ 000-58190? Thank you. This is. Did you receive these monthly reports? Sorry.
No.
No. Can we just look at page 24, please? And it's the part under acceptance loose ends that I took another witness to. And there is, it's the second paragraph there. So this is, sorry, can we just go back to the first page? So we're in February 2000 here. So this is before that final response and the closure.
Mm-hmm.
Page 24, please. Thank you. And just below acceptance loose ends, it's that second bullet point. We've dealt with queries from POCL concerning AI 376. One formal letter has been responded to attempting to avoid the conclusion that we have not found EPOS reconciliation incidents that we should have found, or that we have not reported those we did find. In reality, CS are greatly hampered in spotting the incident because the reports have not had fixes implemented and report large amounts of do-nothing information. We've attended the release management forum and proposed some reordering of the fix backlog, but it will be at least until the first week of March before the situation improves. And I'm just going to take you to one other document that's been put to other witnesses, and that's FUJ 000-79332. Now, this is an email. We think it's the 1st of April 2000, although it could be the 4th of January, depending on whether it's an American or British format. I'm just going to read the first paragraph there. It says, we're getting an increasing number of pinnacles on the end-to-end system handling of the new CI4 transaction modes, leading to cash account misbalances and reconciliation errors. These pinnacles are generally being batted about between different areas. I suggest a workshop is set up, led by either requirements or EPOS, to present the current end-to-end solution, identify the problem areas, and then agree the necessary changes to achieve a consistent solution, etc. So those are just a couple of examples I've taken you to: February 2000, April 2000. We know from that schedule of corrective action that you had chased in December 99, again in April 2000. Are you aware of anything going on behind the scenes in relation to problems with the EPOS product?
No.
Looking at these examples, do you think that there was a problem going on behind the scenes?
Well, looking at the examples, yes, I think there probably was.
You say at paragraph 9I of your witness statement, given the senior management involvement with the resolution, you considered this to have been adequately resolved at the time. This being essentially, I think it's the email from Mr. Coombs.
Yeah, in the context of the corrective action and the audit, yes, I did.
Yes. You phrased that in past tense. You considered this to have been adequately resolved at the time. You I know, have followed this inquiry very carefully. Do you now consider that it had been adequately resolved at the time?
Well, it would appear not, wouldn't it?
Another thing that you say in your witness statement is you refer to a test error identify bug code fix retest cycle. I had no idea what that meant.
Well,
could you clarify that?
Yeah, the question was asked in the lead up to the witness statement about pinnacle fixing culture, which was a phrase I used in the EPOS Task Force report. In fact, it was a phrase that David used this morning. Really, it was just a case of bug, what is it, fix it, put it over the wall, test it, hand it away. It was in the context of I didn't see any evidence or any efforts being made to actually stand back from the problem and say, do we have any root causes that we can attribute these problems to? And if we do, what are they? I didn't see any of that happening, and I wasn't made aware of any of it happening. It was just a case of, oh, here's another bug, let's fix it, and let's move on.
Is that something that you considered at the time, or is that on reflection?
No, I considered it at the time. You know, it's I made a point in the audit report that was going on. It was just, you know, fix and move, fix and move, fix and move, and you know, we all know that that's not necessarily the right way to do anything.
I'm going to move on to a totally different subject. Are you okay to go on?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. And that's audit trails. And it's, again, something that has been of interest to, in particular, some of the sub-postmaster core participants. Can we look at FUJ 00118196, please? Now, the date we have at the top of here is 10th of November 1999. I can say we have later versions of the same report. They're materially the same as this one in respect of the point that I'm going to ask you about, but do say if you disagree.
No, I agree. The later versions were synced in with later releases of the product where the content of the audit trail may have changed. That was all it was.
Thank you. And this one is around the time of the rollout.
That's correct, yeah.
Can we look at page 16, please? Thank you. I won't read that out, but it sets out audit trail retention periods. And it says that the normal retention period would be a period consistent with the Companies Act, or 18 months, whichever is longer. And that in the case of prosecution support, this may be longer in accordance with requirement 829. Is that right?
Yep.
Can you tell us about requirement 829?
Yeah. Requirement 829 was to do with the efficacy of the audit trail in relation to prosecutions and being evidentially submissible in court in line with PACE. Now, I'm no expert on PACE, and in fact, and I'm not trying to shirk it here, but this requirement was actually a security requirement and not an audit requirement. So in terms of making it happen, if you like, at acceptance or whenever, we weren't involved. What we did do in audit, though, was we made every effort during the design and building of the audit solution with the operational audit trail in it, that those records were, the integrity of those records was maintained from the point of generation to the point of extraction onto a CD-ROM to be given to the post office to do with whatever they wanted.
Thank you very much. I'm going to very briefly take you to the codified agreement. It's a very lengthy document. We're only going to look at a short passage, which I'm sure you've already seen, having followed the inquiry. It's FUJ, I think it's 7071. Thank you very much. That's the codified agreement that was signed in the summer of 1999. And can we look at page 97, please? Thank you. And it's 4.1.8 and 4.1.9, which address prosecution support. And again, it refers there to the requirement 829. So this part of the contract being part of that requirement or addressing that requirement. Is this something that you were well aware of at the time?
Yeah, and in the way it the way it impacted on the operational audit trail, yes.
we will return to this shortly, but if you weren't told within the 18-month period that there was an investigation and that certain data would be needed for that investigation, would that information not be retained?
Correct.
And I think we're going to look at Cleverley's incident shortly. Was there a subsequent change of position in relation to that retention of data?
I think that was probably when network banking came in, and there was an obligation to retain data for 7 years in line with the commercial audit trail records. I think it's probably worth going back over the audit trail functional spec just to explain the difference that existed. Whether it's valid or not remains to be seen now. The audit trail functional spec was the stepping stone between the requirements and the system. It identified two types of audit trail: the commercial audit trail, which we hooked into the term records in the contract, and the operational audit trail, which was the record of transactions and events that occurred through the system. Okay, and we had different rules of access for each of those trails. The audit of or the access to the commercial audit trail, the records, would usually be done through physical audits of offices and records and filing cabinets and what have you. The operational audit trail was all held electronically and had to be and stored on magnetic tape for the required period, and then had to be extracted back out and put onto CDs for delivery.
And I want to go over a dispute that occurred in early 2000 about the retention of information. I'm going to start in the summer of 1999, though, and can we look at WITN 059700134, please? Thank you very much. This is a document that was Mr. Folkes was taken to. Did you see his evidence?
No.
No. Mr. Folkes told us that I think he produced the words in the boxes, so it's a response to the words written above. And it's a post office document, so you wouldn't have seen this at the time.
Nope.
No. We know from the top paragraph that it at least occurred after the 15th of July 1999, because that's when the terms of reference were agreed. Can we look at the first two substantive paragraphs under POSIS investigations at outlets, please? Thank you. I'm going to read this for the record. It says, "We were extremely concerned to be informed during the review that POSIS," who were POSIS?
I've no idea.
I don't know. Currently don't have access to archive data from the system. Data on the live system is compressed and archived after 35 days. It was originally intended that access would be gained via the fraud risk management server, which formed part of the benefits payment system and has now been withdrawn. This means the business could be in a position where it's unable to investigate potential frauds or prosecute cases due to the unavailability of critical data. Bob Martin, external crime manager for Pockle's Security and Investigations Executive, informed us that this issue has been raised with senior managers from the project. Les Thorpe, investigation manager in the North East region, advised us that Pathway had estimated the cost to reintroduce the fraud risk management server to be in the region of £180,000, with an additional fee of £1,500 per man day for performing extraction. These concerns were highlighted after a possible fraud at Grange Park SPSO, which is involved in the Horizon Live trial. Do you remember anything about the Grange Park case?
No.
Were you involved in discussions at this time with the Post Office about the retention of data and the cost it might involve, for example?
Not with retention, because that was already sorted out through the existing solution. I did have a number of conversations, this was before BA dropped out, with both BA and Post Office Internal Audit about what their retrieval requirements were for bulk data at the data centres of the operational audit trail. They really didn't know what they wanted. how many they wanted, how they want it presented, how they were going to ask for it. I mean, I suppose it was fairly obvious that from a post office point of view, one of the key factors would be what's the post office number, because we need to get information over a period of time for that post office. And for BA, it would be what's the national insurance number, because we want to get information about that over a period of time. But there was very little in terms of detail, and it took quite a lot of time to get it out of them. Now, the question of the numbers, all right, no, well, that's that piece. Let's look at FRMS. As you're probably aware, FRMS was a BA service, and that was what they were going to use to do their investigation. But you have to realise it would have been populated with BA-specific data. There would have been no post office data on it. So, as it stood, it would have been no use to the post office as a phishing tool. So they were left then with a retrieval service which was based on minimal requirements. I think we reckoned we'd be able to do about one a month, because it was quite intricate the way it had to be done. So we felt with existing staffing we could do perhaps one or two a month, but that was it. And that was also assuming we were dealing with post office internal audit, not with various post office investigation units who numbered hundreds of people around the country suddenly saying, we want this data, we want this data, we want this data.
And we'll come to that particular disagreement. If we could scroll down slightly, we have the box there from Mr. Folkes, and in the second paragraph he says, the replicated copy of the data is held at the data centre and is retained for 90 days within the Riposte messaging store. Every record is written to tape to be retained for the period for which we have contracted, usually 18 months, but extended indefinitely if specific records are needed for the support of the prosecution, and to be made available to POCL under the contracted audit requirements. So it highlights that I think POCL has access to the data centre. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Not direct access to the data centre. That was through the retrieval process.
And when you say the retrieval process?
The retrieval process that was run by Pathway.
And is that the request for information process? Yes. We will come to that. And if we can go over the page, he says that POCL's TIP system had transaction data that could also be obtained by POCL itself. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Thank you. And then there's a section on fraud risk management service, and in bold letters there, it says the BA fraud management service was never intended to act as a means of accessing specific POCL transaction data, and indeed being a BA service, the non-BPS transaction data should not have been available to BA for sound commercial and data protection reasons. Is that what you were just saying to me? So the fraud, that particular management service was built for the benefits agency, not for POCL.
That's correct, yeah.
If we look at number 6 there, it says, if POCL did wish to establish its own FRMS geared to POCL's data, and therefore not restricted to only BPS-related activities, this could, of course, be done, and Pathway would undoubtedly be willing to provide this service. However, this would be a new requirement and would need to be funded. Note the distinction here between a full FRMS with sophisticated data mining and reporting tools aimed at detecting patterns, etc., and simple access to transaction data, which FRMS was never intended to provide. So he seems to be saying there that if POCL could have a similar service, but it would need to be paid for. Were you ever party to those kinds of discussions? No.
No.
I mean, he identifies it might involve reporting tools aimed at identifying different patterns, for example, rather than simple access to transaction data. Is that something that you ever considered?
No, if that was part of the activity that the FRMS could supply, then I wasn't aware of that. That was run by a different part of Martin Bennett's organisation. But yes, I mean, all we were providing through the audit data was simple transaction data, we weren't doing any analysis of it. We weren't doing any manipulation of it. We were just pulling the records off the archive, putting them onto CDs and sending them on.
So you wouldn't, for example, look at trends of relating to that are relevant to the prosecution of postmasters?
No, why would we? We're the suppliers of the service. We're not involved in, running the post office's business other than providing data that they might need.
Can we scroll down to C7 and 8, please? Audit access to transaction data. It says a documented process has been established between POCL and ICL Pathway for access to historical audit information from Pathway's central system under the auspices of the requirement on audit, requirements 699 and 829, using a request for information procedure. So again, that's something I will take you to shortly, but you had a formal procedure to access audit data. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, because we'd had a couple of instances where we'd been getting requests in from various people within post office. And I can't, we probably tried to deal with them with best endeavours, but then, it suddenly became onerous, and we therefore had to work out a way of doing this properly. And that's when Hilary and I agreed, and then Chris Painter, that we'd have a single point of contact. And this was to filter down all of these various investigation units that suddenly seemed to say, well, we want dibs on this data. So,
did that all come as a surprise to you?
Yes.
Was it something that was discussed during the earlier stages?
No, not to my knowledge.
Looking at paragraph 8 there, this again refers to Grange Park case where the request didn't follow the correct route, so presumably not through a request for information. And it talks about a potential opportunity to improve the agreements between yourselves.
Yeah.
Does that jog your memory at all about Grange Park?
No, not as an individual post office, no.
Do you remember cases in the early days when there may have been a refusal for audit data because it didn't follow the correct procedure?
No, I know I was involved in 7 or 8 inquiries, a few of which I supplied witness statements to, and possibly some I also supplied data to, because at that time it was me that was doing the retrieval work. So yeah, it's possible I was doing that, but then that was on the best endeavours basis, and it was only when it started to get out of hand that we had to put in place a gatekeeper role, which was Chris Painter.
Can we go over the page, please, to the paragraph that begins Bob Martin? It says that Bob Martin also advised us. This is from the original post office drafting,
yeah.
not the edition. Also advised us that Security and Investigation Executive had requested an expert witness statement from Pathway to support a prosecution, and this had been refused on grounds that there were no contractual requirement. It was not a contractual requirement. John Cook advised us that there is a contractual requirement for Pathway to ensure the system meets the requirements of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. There is a need for Pathway to agree with S&IE and the internal audit how this requirement will be met, as well as the procedures for obtaining this evidence when needed for prosecutions. Do you remember the example that's given there about a request for an expert witness statement that had been refused?
No. As I say, I produced several. Initiated by different people. I produced one initiated by a police sergeant as part of his investigation. So, to some extent, at that time, as I said, it was best endeavours, and we would do what we could. Now, with regard to no contractual requirement, I'm not a PACE expert, but if witness statements form part of PACE and the continuation of evidence and support of evidence, then I can't see how it couldn't have been covered by the contract.
In relation to your own statements, were they criminal proceedings, civil proceedings?
They were in support of whatever the post office were doing.
And who asked you to provide those?
Well, as I say, a variety of people, I think. As I say, I'd one request from a police sergeant who was doing an investigation into a post office. I did another for Cleverley's post office, and I think I did one or two others as well.
We'll look at the Cleveley's example shortly. Yeah. Who internally was asking you to provide that statement? Do you remember?
What you mean in terms of pathway?
Yes.
Nobody. It was directly between me and the person requesting it from the other side.
So when it was the post office, for example, who would it have been that asked you to provide a statement?
It may have been Hillary. It may have been whoever was involved with that investigation. As I said, this was in the very early days when we were just understanding how this thing was going to work. So it was always on a case of best endeavours and trying to meet what the customer wanted.
We've heard about...
Actually, is this just a discussion between you and the person? Just someone approaches you and says,
"No, I'm sure I would have been looking for somebody with some authority. It wouldn't be just anybody in the office."
So they have a hunch that you might be the right person.
No, I did deal with individuals over time. Hilary Stewart was the latter one, and taken over by Chris Painter. There was another guy called Richard Cruz. I had some dealings with him, but I think he's subsequently left. So yeah, it wasn't just a case of anybody could ring me up and say, "We need a witness statement."
So if I understand you correctly, persons who were known to you from working in conjunction with them over time, and who would know that you would have the ability to provide this information.
I think that's a fair comment.
Did you ever give a statement that addressed whether there were bugs or defects in Horizon?
No.
We've heard about Gareth Jenkins. Did you know Gareth Jenkins?
Yes, I knew Gareth Jenkins.
Were you aware that he provided statements in relation to criminal proceedings?
I am now, yes.
Were you aware at the time?
No.
Do you know why he might have been approached to give those statements?
Well, possibly because he was quite a knowledgeable person on the workings of the system. I mean, I'm non-technical, but if I wanted some technical input to, understand something about how the system was working, to be fair, Gareth was my go-to guy because he knew a lot about a lot. And so, I made use of that knowledge as and when I needed to. So if he was doing witness statements, I'm hardly surprised.
Did you know somebody called Anne Chambers at all?
No. I remember reading the article, and I was thinking of somebody else called Anne on the project, but it wasn't Anne Chambers. No, I didn't even recognise the face.
Were you aware of other people giving witness statements to support criminal prosecutions?
Yeah, after I came back onto the project in 2001, the actual activity of data retrievals and provision of prosecution support had passed from audit, if you like, into the live customer support environment and was under the security banner. And they had an operator there who was doing the retrievals, and she often had to provide a witness statement in support of the retrieval to explain how it was done and how the integrity of the data had been maintained.
Do you remember who that was?
Not off the top of my head, no, but I know where I can find out.
Thank you. Staying with this document before we go to the RFI procedure, if we could just scroll down, there's a section on transaction processing. And if we go over the page, it says that TP transaction processing were also concerned at, and then the first one, on the top of that page, the legal implications of manual alterations to computerised cash account by sub-postmasters in the event of a court case. Is the ability to correct or erase data something that you were involved in at all from an ICL side, from an audit side, for example?
Can I just see the context of that paragraph?
Absolutely.
I find that top bullet hard to accept. Okay, I can understand the first bullet. I was not aware at all that sub-postmasters had the ability to carry out manual alterations to computerised cash accounts.
And how about members of ICL?
I'm not sure about that because I'm not sure the level to which third line support SSC got involved in manipulating, not manipulating, that's the wrong word, in working the system in order to resolve issues and problems at that third level of support.
Was it ever an issue that you had cause to investigate, or?
No.
Can we look at poll 000296165, please? Just looking at the time. So this might be an appropriate time for a 10-minute break.
Yep, by all means.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Before the break, we were looking at poll 000296165. This is the Horizon System Audit Manual. Can you very briefly tell us what this was, the purpose of this document was?
Yeah, what this document set out to achieve was a description of the audit trails. It was like a further expansion of the audit trail functional spec. So this was trying to present information in a way that was understandable, legible, and could be recognised and used by the internal audit community, whether that's Pathway, Post Office or BA at the time. So it looked at the requirements, and it looked at the roles, and it looked at what could be done, and then it went in to describe what actually each piece of the audit trail consisted of.
Thank you. It says their status draft, and it's dated the 17th of January 2000. Are you able to assist us with that at all?
No, not really. I mean, it sort of went through a number of updates and drafting and improvements over time.
I think version 1.0 was April 1999, if that assists.
That's quite possible.
We see their name Chris Painter, P-O-I-A.
Yeah.
Who was he?
Well, Chris Painter was at that time the single point of contact for data retrievals.
And what did P-O-I-A stand for?
Post Office Internal Audit.
So was he from the Post Office?
Yes, yeah.
Employed by the Post Office?
Yeah.
So this manual presumably was shared with the Post Office for a particular reason.
Yes, yeah.
And what was that reason?
Knowledge sharing.
Can we look at page 53, please? This is where the request for information is procedures set out. It says POIA will request audit data via request for information form. This will contain a description in business terms of the times, outlets, events, items, and activities that the auditors are interested in. This request has to be interpreted by Pathway Internal Audit and mapped onto the audit points and files described earlier in this manual. The focus there is on auditors obtaining the information. Yep. Is that intentional?
Yes.
And why is that?
Because they were the audience for that data, the audit data, as far as we were concerned, through the request for information process.
And was this route for obtaining information known by the Post Office?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that because I don't know what their internal communications were.
So you have somebody from the Post Office being on the distribution list.
Yes.
Are you aware of, just from your experience of liaising with people from the Post Office, whether they knew that this was a route or the route to obtain information?
No, I don't.
If we go over the page, there's a section on investigation support. And that says the term investigation is used in its broadest sense and does not limit itself to fraud. Any RFI is likely to be associated with a specific business event, e.g. an encashment, a bill payment, an outlet, a beneficiary. It it is anticipated that the majority of this type will be based on the TMS journal or will use it as a start point. Can you explain that to us, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think 829 refers to prosecution support, which implies perhaps some kind of fraudulent activity. But at the end of the day, this data was available for any kind of investigation that the Post Office wanted to put it to. Fraud would be one of them, or suspected fraud.
And can we look at page 57 and the bottom section on page 57? Requesting audit data extractions, prerequisite, Post Office internal audit will be expected to identify auditors who are authorised to raise an RFI. It is not anticipated that this list will exceed 2 names. It is the responsibility of Post Office internal audit to notify Pathway internal audit of any changes to this list. What was the purpose behind that?
Well, looking back, I guess it's to give Chris Painter an opportunity to have some deputies or to perhaps have people in different parts of the organisation who could request data with his authority.
But why wouldn't it be available to anybody?
Well, because we'd be swamped. If there was no control, then I think we could have anticipated that there would be masses of requests because people would. It's like if you suddenly find something that works, you exploit it.
And when you wrote this in 99, 2000, what did you see as the role of the request for information in respect of criminal prosecutions?
It was just one of a number of reasons why that RFI might have been raised.
So you did expect the RFI to be used for the purpose of obtaining that information?
Yeah, yes.
But I think you said before that you didn't expect the volume, is that right?
That's correct, because in the early days, the volume was as we thought it, as we saw it as being in the 10s, low 20s possibly a year, based on what we were being told.
We're going to move on to the particular disputes that I mentioned in 2000. Can we look at FUJ 00121100, please? Now, this is a letter from Keith Baines of the Post Office to Tony Oppenheim, and it's dated the 10th of January, although the 10th is crossed out and it says 11th, and it has your name there amongst others. Do you remember this at all? I know you've seen it.
I remember the issue being around at the time, yes.
And Miles Blewett, was he a lawyer?
He was a lawyer with Masons.
Thank you. If we could scroll down, I'm just going to read a little bit for the record and to refresh your memory. First, halfway through the first paragraph, I understand the concern to be that while Pathway are cooperating over true audit access, it is being claimed that such provisions do not extend to supporting investigations for security purposes. Martin has also suggested that if such access were to be granted, then a charge would be levied. The next paragraph, starting at the second sentence, neither Pockle nor Pathway would wish to initiate such investigations without due cause, accepting that there may be time-consuming and distracting for both organisations. But nevertheless, where there are grounds for suspicion, the issue must be investigated thoroughly. Without such an investigation, we, jointly, could not be sure that the access controls and integrity of the Pathway services are not being breached. Apart from this practical perspective, I think that denying such access is at variance with, and that's the reference to the codified agreement there that we have already seen, and the reference to the 18-month period and the requirement to support investigations. And can we look over the page, please? At the bottom there, it says, it refers to 801.3, and it's a contractual term. But then it says, pathways should provide access and may be paid for their assistance. Then there's a holding response to that, and I'm not going to take you to it, but it's FUJ 00121101. Instead, I'm going to take you to a note from yourself at FUJ 000585509, please.
Can I come back to that later?
Yes, absolutely. Well, can you tell us in broad terms what's going on there in that letter?
I think what was going on there, that there was an issue that there was a bit of confusion. As I said, the audit trail functional spec identified two particular types of audit trails. The commercial audit trail, which I think links into requirement 699 that talks about records, and I can't remember the requirement number for the operational audit trail. And the operational audit trail, which were things like the TMS journal records and OBCS files and all this stuff that was put on Legato. Now, access to the records, the commercial audit trail, was not done through the RFI process. That was invariably, I mean, if it was done, it would be done through a direct request into the likes of Tony Oppenheim for access to the commercial records. The RFI was for access to the operational audit trail. And I think if you go back to that previous exhibit, there's reference in there to the records under clause 801, and I think what's happened is that there's been a conflation of two different topics into one.
And I think you mentioned that, in fact, in this document that we look at now, which is a briefing note that you wrote. If we look over the page, in fact, to page 3, please. I think the first page explains that you've received that letter, and there's going to be a discussion about it. Further down the page, please, under statements. Did you write this section?
Yeah.
Let's look at paragraphs 2 to 4, please. It says, arguably, we already provide approximately 95% of what they want via the tip link on a daily basis. Now, is that similar to what Mr. Folkes was saying in the document that I took you to earlier on?
I think it might be. I mean, I can't remember for sure, but where my mind's going on this is that a lot of this was to do with security investigations, sort of doing fishing trips, what if with the data, you know, let's have a look at this and see what there is, let's have a look at this, see what there is, and not a case of we need this in order to progress a case or a fraud or an investigation. I know there's a subtle difference, but a lot of what we felt they required could be achieved through TIP.
And in fact, you refer to fishing trips in paragraph 3.
Yeah.
So you say this could service their fishing trips, which I believe account for the few hundred queries anticipated by Bob Martin.
Yeah.
We would then extract from the audit archive to form the prime evidence for prosecution or dismissal. This approach was discussed with Hilary Stewart during the development period and acceptance. So are you saying there that if they want to look at the data for their own investigations, they had the TIP data, and it's only when when formal evidence is required that they should be coming to you?
That in effect is what I'm saying, yes.
And can we go over the page, please? Again, POCL have always maintained an organisational distinction between the network auditors who access the system outlets and the central auditors who have access to historical audit data at the centre via pathway internal audit. POCL have always been involved in the development of the audit trail functional specification, the audit data retrieval requirements and the Horizon System Audit Manual, where there is a separation this separation has been reflected in the solution currently implemented. Is what you're saying in paragraph 6 about the document that I took you to before, where somebody from the post office was sent the specification, and you're saying there that the post office has always been involved in those discussions?
Indeed. I mean, the audit trail functional spec was a CCD, so it was a contract control document, so it couldn't be changed without the agreement of the post office.
And at 8, you've said at 7, the audit solution in its current form has been formally accepted by Post Office Counters Limited.
Yeah.
And it's paragraph 8, you talk about clause 801, which is the point I think you were just making.
Yes, yeah.
Can we look at paragraph 11?
I apologise for my intemperate language in there as well.
No, not at all. I mean, perhaps you can tell us about the atmosphere at that stage between yourselves and the Post Office and why you may have made that comment.
Well, I think it was just a throwaway line by me. How can we be held responsible for a dodgy postmaster? I mean, to be fair, in my role as pulling audit data for prosecution support, I had no idea or no knowledge at all of what level of underlying fraud was going on within the Post Office. I'm sure there was a level. There must be in a network that large with that many people. But how then that number would suddenly jump to 100 to 200 potential investigations a year? I just don't know. I mean, it sort of wasn't our job to query that with the Post Office. I would have expected them to have queried that themselves to try and understand better why there was this upsurge in perceived bad activity.
Did you experience a sudden upsurge in requests?
Well, no, it was only when we got information, sort of requests like the Bob Martin 1 to 200. And you think, well, why is this number suddenly up where it is? We weren't made aware of these volumes. And in fact, when we talked to people like Hillary at the time and Jeff Robinson from the BA in the early days, it was tens, 20s, which we felt we could achieve within our current headcount.
Did you ever have a discussion with the Post Office as to why there was this sudden increase?
No, and that's I suppose perhaps where we could have done a bit more to question the increase. I would have half expected them to do their own investigation into that matter, not rely on others to say, why have you got this increase in numbers?
Can we go over the page, please, to page 5 and look at paragraphs 11 and 12? Paragraph 11, about halfway through that paragraph, it says, I do recall conversations with Hillary, over a period of time where we discussed the potential for POCL using tip data for their fishing trips, and then coming to me for the true data once they had progressed their investigation to a point of prosecution or dismissal. We never formally agreed that this would be the way to go, but the potential was aired. Again, though, note that it was her regional audit colleagues and not POCL security investigations. Can you tell us what you're saying there?
Well, Hillary was referring to the regional internal audit staff that she would have been dealing with, not POCL security investigations, which were a different part of the organisation.
And at some point, did POCL security investigations become heavily involved?
Only at this point here. And I think that happened because they suddenly realised they'd lost FRMS.
And that's what we talked about at the very beginning.
Yeah.
And at the bottom of this page, this tells me that POCL knew that they were exposed as early as February 1999. The early discussions during the audit panel meetings were held with fraud risk management, a separate part of Pathway to Audit. Bob Martin's paid study was sponsored into Pathway by fraud risk management. We've seen further correspondence for the purpose of the transcript, FUJ 001211102, but it seems to crystallise in a letter of the 22nd of February 2000, and I'm going to take you to that. That is FUJ 00121103. This is a letter from Martin Bennett to Keith Baines. Can we scroll down slightly? I'm just going to read to you two short passages. The first is the second paragraph, halfway through. In summary, Pathway maintain a transaction audit trail for the required period of 18 months and allow members of Post Office internal audit access to that audit trail in accordance with the agreed procedures and subject to known limitations, which I describe below. The issue we are concerned with has arisen for two reasons. First, a POCL organisation other than POIA, that is Post Office Network National Security Team, has requested access to the transaction audit trail to support security investigations. Second, PONNST recently indicated in November last year that it would require a few hundred transaction/event logs to be provided during a full year, which has never previously been raised with us, and Pathway does not consider it to be a contractual requirement. So do we understand there that the response from Pathway at this time was that effectively, as you've said this afternoon, that it was a surprise to suddenly be receiving a few hundred requests?
Well, and from a group of people that we'd never heard of before.
And what was their job as far as you were aware?
National Security Team, I've no idea.
There's a response, and I don't think we need to take you to it, but for the purposes of the transcript, it's FUJ 00121104, and that's the response from the Post Office, which says that it's a question of legal interpretation and one for lawyers. I think you've seen that document. But I'm going to take you to FUJ 00121105, please. This is a letter from Martin Bennett to Keith Baines and appears to record a tentative agreement on the issue.
Yeah.
If we look at, if we could scroll down, so this is the 24th of May 2000, it seems as though there's a tentative agreement. ICL Pathway will provide up to 50 audit data extractions per annum for audit and security investigation purposes, with a maximum of 7 in any calendar month. Any additional extractions will be charged for on the basis that, on average, such extraction will take 1.5 man-days of senior consultants' time at $1,299 per man-day plus expenses. This will cover all work, including physical extraction of tapes at the data center, loading onto machines, rebuilding the correspondence server as necessary, searching for data, extraction and recording onto appropriate medium. Can you just tell us, why did it take so much time to obtain this information, to extract the data?
It was just a complicated system. I mean, if you go into the Horizon System Audit Manual, I think at about section 10, there's a description of the audit system, including the retrieval activity. It was complex, and I can't make any excuse for it being complex. It just was complex, and as such, it took a lot of manual effort to go through the process of identifying well, you had to interpret the RFI, you had to work out what files were needed to service the RFI, because we didn't have a standard catalogue of RFIs. It was more a case of what do you want. We then had to interpret that to decide which files we had to get in order to service the RFI, and that meant that when the Post Office got the data, they might have to extract information from 2 or 3 different sources on that data to get the information they wanted. So there was no single report came out by extracting lots of different audit data files. So we had to do that. We had to locate where they were on the various legato tapes, which were the DLTs that we were using to store the data on. Then we had to liaise with the data centres to get the tapes up and loaded onto the servers at the data centres so that the audit workstation at Feltham could access them. There was only one audit workstation in Feltham to work from, because that's all we felt we needed based on the original requirements. And it just took time.
You told us earlier about a special fraud management system that would have been implemented for the benefits agency.
Yeah.
Is that what was missing in relation to the Post Office agreement, some sort of automated system?
Well, I was under the impression, and having read through some of the documentation, that the Post Office were either planning to or were in some kind of agreement with the benefits agency to make use of some aspects of the FRMS, because obviously if there were benefit encashment issues going on, not only would the benefit agency need to know, but also the post office would need to know that there may have been collusion going on in offices between postmasters and beneficiaries. I don't know. So I think there was some kind of fledgling agreement going on to give the post office access to the FRMS for certain types of data searching and information retrieval. But I don't know. Because when that went, there was nothing.
So the period of time you're talking about at the moment was some way back, was it?
Yeah, I mean, BA dropped out of the contract in 1999, I think, just as we were approaching acceptance. And of course, when they dropped out, all of their services dropped out with them, including the FRMS.
And point 3 on this letter says all requests for extractions will continue to be channeled through ICL Pathways Audit Manager, who is now Brian Mooney.
Yeah.
That suggests that by that stage, May 2000, you had moved.
I'd moved on, yeah.
Now, in your experience going forward from the dates, especially from when you rejoined,
Yeah.
Were the Post Office reluctant to obtain audit data?
I don't know, because the responsibility for delivering that service had moved from audit to customer services. Security had taken it under their umbrella, and security at that time were working for customer services as part of the live service delivery.
Are you aware of that tentative agreement, whether that was the final agreement, whether there was a similar agreement?
No. No.
Are you aware of a significant sum along those lines being charged for audit data?
No.
So that was no longer part of your remit?
It was it was yeah, it was no longer part of my remit.
Can we go to FUJ 00001419, please? Can you tell us what this document is?
It's sad. Not really. There's a lot of information in there that I recognise, but in terms of the SAD itself,
You'll be relieved to know I'm not going to take you to all the various complicated diagrams in this document. I'm just going to take you to page 4, please. And this talks about fraud risk management. And can we look at the bottom of this page? It says Pathways' strategy is to identify high-risk situations and adapt systems as necessary to minimise fraud exposure within the Pathway solution, provide information service to POCL to aid fraud investigation and to minimise fraud. The information provided is information to aid the investigation of actual fraud incidents, and then over the page, certification relevant to operation of the system required by PACE, etc. And then it's these two that I'm particularly interested in. Information for the investigation of system boundary related incidents and trends, for example, counter-staff related fraud with the aim of developing improved procedures, and analysis of incidents and trends within Pathways' immediate control to improve its systems. Was this something within your remit, or was that outside?
no, it was outside.
What I'd like to understand is, were you aware of ICL Pathway having any proactive role in identifying high-risk situations or providing analysis of incidents and trends relating to, for example, criminal prosecutions?
No, I don't think I was. No, in fact, I wasn't.
And you weren't aware. Do you think that they happened or didn't happen?
I don't know. I wouldn't know.
We looked at the sophisticated tools that were proposed in that BA system, for example, the fraud risk management server. Do you think that the lack of analysis or the lack of a special system along the lines that the benefits agency had proposed was a missed opportunity?
What, for the post office?
Yes.
Well, yeah, I guess anything that would improve their operation must be to their benefit. So if they opted or chose not to do something that may have benefited from them, then I'm not sure what they would expect Pathway to do to fill in.
Were you ever aware of any serious analysis of incidents and trends arising from that kind of data taking place at ICL Pathway?
No.
I'm going to move on to the Cleverley's case. Can we look at FUJ 000807115, please? Now, this was a document that you produced, and it's a report on Cleverley's post office. Do you recall that a sub-postmistress was dismissed very early on? I think it was November 2000.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
Now-
it didn't come to our attention for witness statements or support until 2004.
And that's something we'll come to, because obviously that's relevant for the retention of the audit data.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you would accept that from what we've discussed this afternoon, in that period, so November 2000, there were undoubtedly issues with the Horizon system.
I do know now that was the case. At the time, I didn't.
There was, in this particular case, a jointly appointed expert who produced a report that said that Horizon could have caused an error. Are you aware of that?
Who was the expert?
So if we scroll down, I think this document summarises the fact that there was an expert.
Oh, are you talking about here?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes, there was an expert.
Yes. And they produced a report that said that Horizon could have been responsible.
Yeah, they're also accused of sending incomplete data as well, but that's beside the point.
Can we look at page 4, please? And if we could scroll down. Can you tell us the purpose of this particular report?
This was me just capturing the after-event story, if you like, because it actually proved to be a non-event from our point of view. I actually got as far as the courthouse before it was cancelled because there was an out-of-court settlement reached. So I felt it was appropriate to capture what had happened, because there's quite a lot of my time and the company's time had gone into supporting this prosecution, and it just disappeared.
And if we look at scope, it says this report does not set out to address the case itself, merely what POA have provided as support and some of the issues identified in providing that assistance. It does make recommendations as to how future involvement by POA in these non-standard cases might be better managed. Were you intentionally not going into the rights and wrongs of the particular case?
I can't. I'm not qualified to do that.
Were you instructed to do this at all, to carry this out by anybody?
Well, probably yes. I wouldn't have just done it, voluntarily. I suspect I was probably instructed by Martin to look after this, or perhaps security asked me to look after it.
Can we scroll down, please? There's a section there talking about the expert report. Could we keep on scrolling, please? Sorry, if we could just go up slightly. Thank you. At the bottom, just above 3.2, it says there, we've offered to host the expert at any of our locations so he can analyse the data directly, speak to the experts, and a walkthrough of the problem management cycle for himself. He will not have seen this offer since it was contained in the email that accompanied our final response, and this has not been passed on to the expert pending an outcome of an out-of-court settlement offer by Pol to the PM. And then it's got an update there, I think, or 1st of April 2004, confirmed with Jim Cruz that the recommended 3-month salary offer is now with Pol for approval. you were aware at the time. Were you aware at the time that they were making the settlement offer?
I don't think I knew about that until we were in court, until I'd actually turned up.
And if we could scroll down to the chronology, if we look at the bottom entry there, it says nothing more was heard for almost, it's the 6th of February 2004, nothing more was heard for almost 6 months until we received a letter from the post office containing the expert's report. Post office were concerned that the report claimed that the equipment installed at Cleverleys was defective and that the Horizon System help desk was more concerned with closing calls than resolving problems. Post office feared that if the report went unchallenged, it could set a precedent for other cases being progressed against postmasters. Is that something you remember at all? That the fear of a precedent being set, for example, was that ever communicated?
Well, I don't deny writing that chronology. And that post office fearing was probably a collective concern that was expressed by people like myself, Graham Hooper, who was the security manager, and possibly Martin Bennett as well.
So who had, I think it says there, the post office feared that if the report went unchallenged, it could set a precedent. Were you aware from the post office of those concerns?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm with you, yeah, I'm with you. Well, sorry, yeah, I sort of led you down a garden path there. Yeah, if that's post office, because I can understand we would be concerned at that as well. But that probably came through Jim Cruz.
Do you remember it at all? Do you remember any fears being communicated to you about?
Not specific fears, no.
So I think it mentioned somewhere in this report, but slightly higher up, that courts hadn't previously found a problem, so that could be a basis for saying that the system was functioning sufficiently.
If
we could scroll up. So I don't have the paper copy of this one, so if we go up a little more. There, it's POA cannot prove in the literal sense that the system operated correctly during 2000, since we do not have the transaction data that will demonstrate that fact. Just pausing there, you didn't have the transaction data, I think, because the 18-month period had passed. Is
That's
that
correct,
right?
yeah.
And as you said, you were only contacted after that period had expired about this particular case. Equally, any proving that we could do, for example, by design walkthroughs with the expert, would prove nothing, since it would be a 2004 system baseline that was being considered, not one from 2000. We can infer that it was, since we are not aware of any contemporary poll prosecutions failing due to the system not operating correctly. So was the feeling there that because prosecutions hadn't previously failed, that would be sufficient to infer that there wasn't a problem?
I don't think that's an unreasonable position to take. You know, if there is no history of prosecutions of that type, there is nothing to suggest, to my mind anyway, that there would be a problem now.
And looking at that and then turning the page to the bottom of the next page, and that section that I took you to a moment ago about the fear of setting a precedent, is your recollection one of concern that a successful or an unsuccessful case, in this particular case, the Cleverleys case, might set a precedent undermining future prosecutions?
Well, I think reading that now, that looks to me that it took 6 months before we received a copy from the post office containing the expert's report. And yes, you're right, that's post office, not post office account. And if they were concerned that the report claimed that the equipment was defective, then that could be seized by other people that said, well, if it's defective there, it's defective elsewhere. And if the Horizon System Help Desk was more concerned with closing calls and reserving problems, then that could be seized upon and used again. So the Post Office were looking for us to challenge that report, which we did.
And can we go to the bottom of page 6, please? It's the final entry, 13th of August 2004, notified by Poll that Post Office had made an increased offer to the postmistress to drop the case, and this had been accepted, not required in court. We've seen a document, I'll give you the reference, but I don't think we need to go to it. It's Poll 000905575 that says that the settlement was for £187,000, which included costs. Were you aware of the figure at all?
No.
Were you aware, I think you said that you only found out on the day about the settlement. Did you go to court? Or
I did, yeah.
were you aware that it was a substantial figure?
No.
Did anyone express any views as to how it was settled? And
No, I'm quite frankly stunned at the amount. Because at the end of the day, the lady removed the equipment from the office and refused to return it. So quite why she was getting compensation beats me.
Well, she had a claim for unfair dismissal. That's
Well,
what
possibly
her
so,
counterclaim was about.
yeah.
we know that shortly after this incident, we have the Lee Castleton case. Was that a case that you were aware of at all?
No.
Do you think this case was a missed opportunity in getting to the bottom of problems with Horizon?
What, Cleveley's?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, possibly so, yes.
I've got a few small further topics to ask on behalf of core participants. Can we look at poll 000-89802, please? This is a November 2001 audit of customer services support processes. And can we look at page 4, please? This was written by you or originated by you, from you. Do you remember the purpose of this document?
Well, it was an audit report, wasn't it?
And what did it address?
The processes that were being used by customer services as part of their role.
And can we go to page 5, please? And there's an overall opinion there. Can we scroll down a little bit? Thank you very much. I'm just going to read out the first couple there. So it says, there are a number of relatively minor issues that, while not impairing the current management of incidents and problems, could, if accepted and addressed, improve the performance on this part of CS. CS being customer support, is that?
Customer services, yeah.
Customer services. Provide a definition and guidance for when an incident should be escalated to become a problem. Introduce formal root cause analysis into problem and complaints management as a matter of course. If we go over the page, please, and to the bottom, there's discussion there. Do you remember this about it not being easy to identify what constitutes a problem and when an incident becomes a problem? Is that something you remember at all?
Yes, vaguely, yeah.
And there's the box after that on the next page, which says, although relatively trivial, the lack of guidance or definition can introduce uncertainty and the opportunity for problems to be missed or unnecessarily escalated. It's recommended that there's an update to provide definition criteria and, if considered useful, examples. The question that I'm asked to ask you is whether you still, looking back, think that that was a trivial problem.
The problem in itself wasn't trivial because at the end of the day, there were some, there were some rules around it, but they weren't formalised as far as I can recall. So formalising was a trivial bit. The actual escalation from an incident to a problem is not in itself trivial because it generates a whole different set of actions. So I think what I may have been referring to as trivial is the lack of guidance.
Thank you. We can take that down, thank you. I've got a question about the help desk. At paragraph 11b of your statement, you point to two documents which set out the adequacy or otherwise of the help desk. We're going to explore this a lot more in a lot more detail during phase 3. But can you tell us your broad views about how effective the help desk was, please?
Which help desk? I'm sorry, I'm saying that because there are a number of different levels of help desks. There were the help desks that sat within the post office environment that were looking after advice and guidance, because that was all being handled at one time by the Horizon System help desk, and then it got separated out, and I think that might be what the EDSC was about.
Yes.
And that was up in Barnsley, I think, because I went up there once for a visit. The Horizon System help desk was then the next level. But I mean, I didn't have a particular view on it. It was there to fulfill a function. And again, I did visit, it was split over 2 sites. I did visit both sites as part of an audit. But it seemed to be functioning in the sense of calls being handled and sufficient manpower to do the work. The audit didn't involve going in to look at specific calls and saying, you handle that well or you didn't handle that well. That's not what the nature of the audit was.
And finally, as someone who audited the system and was involved in discussions about retention periods and the provision of data for prosecutions, what is your view about the post office relying on Horizon data to prosecute people?
Well, in the olden days, I guess when the post office had paper records in the outlet, then they would rely on those records to prove guilt or not guilt, sorry, to prove that something was going on or not. Those paper records disappeared when Horizon came on the scene, so they had to place reliance on the Horizon data then to carry out those investigations and to make the necessary prosecutions if that's what they wanted to do. So they had no option but to rely on the Horizon data.
And knowing what you know about problems with Horizon data, what is your opinion?
Well, they still had no option. Yes, I mean, what's happened is disastrous, it's very bad, but at the time it wasn't known, and I'm not sure what I can say to that.
I mean, when you say it wasn't known, it was known that there were...
It wasn't known to me, let's put it that way. Whether it was known elsewhere, I don't know.
When you say it wasn't known, do you mean nobody connected the prosecutions with the problems with the Horizon system, or was there something else that was?
Well, no, as I alluded to earlier, that I would have expected the post office to have made that connection somehow, because we sort of couldn't. All we could do is we were taking requests for data. We didn't know what they were doing with it. They never said, this data is required for a potential prosecution. It was just, this data is required. So we didn't know what they were doing with it. They did. And, I think it was beholden on them to have been, I don't know, more careful, is that the right term? But to be, had a duty of care to make sure they were using that data in an appropriate manner and that it was correct. Which sounds odd because you might think that's our job to make sure it's correct. What we were able to do was to demonstrate that we collected what was sent to be collected. We stored it securely. When we retrieved it, we proved that we'd stored it correctly by recalculating checksum seals, and it was extracted and distributed in a controlled environment.
You had identified problems with Horizon data in 1998 and 1999 to management within ICL. And you were aware, and management were aware, that there was a dramatic increase in requests for data from the post office. Do you think somebody should have put those two together?
Sorry, when you say we were aware that there were problems with the data,
Well, for example, the EPOS Pinnacle Task Force and the various reports that I took you to
Yeah.
first thing today identified that there were underlying system issues. There was severe criticism that we've heard from Mr. McDonnell, for example. Do you think somebody, I don't know who, and you can perhaps tell us who, should have put those two things together?
I can't offer a name or a group who might have done that.
You may not be able to offer a name or a group who might have done that, but who should have done that?
Within Pathway?
Yes.
I really don't know. I really don't know.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holmes. I don't have any further questions. There may be some questions from other call participants. Mr.
Anyone?
Henry looks like he's consulting his papers.
Yes, if I may, I don't know, Mr. Chair.
No, he has no question.
Hello, Mr. Holmes. Thank you, sir. Mr. Holmes, would you please be kind enough to look at Fujitsu 000 80690, one of the areas from which I've been permitted to ask you some
Okay.
questions. And we can see, if we may, over the page at page 2, thank you very much, document history, 18th of September 98, initial draft following task force completion. And this was written with Mr. McDonnell, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
And then 14th of May 01, raised to V1 or VI .0,
It's V-
administrative catch-up.
It's V1. Yeah, I think that was just me.
That was you, because
Yeah.
you were back by that time, because although you'd left, you came back in 2001.
Yeah, yes, actually I did, but it was after this date, so I'm struggling now to know.
Because you'd gone to a ProCell or something.
Yeah, I'd gone to Propel.
Yeah, because
and-
that's...
And then I'd come back after
Yeah.
about a year because that programme collapsed.
Absolutely, because as you stated in paragraph 3 of your statement, could we go to page 4 of 20, please? And could we go to management summary, please? We can see just above that in scope that we're dealing with a period there of EPOS between the 19th of August and the 18th of September, and that, of course, would have been in 1998.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we have the management summary, which let's take that as read. Could we go to page 7 of 20, please? And we can see there, it is clear that senior members of the task force are extremely concerned about the quality of code in the EPOS product, etc., etc. And then over the page to 8 of 20, please. And at 4.2, we can see at letters A to F that the pinnacle stacks in relation to this concerning EPOS have been divided into 6 separate pots.
Yep.
So no doubt that was in order to sort of track the matter chronologically, but also it was there because perhaps you were, for example, doing a holding stack while fix activity was underway. Post-fix, but pre-link test.
Yeah.
Right.
That was to allow us to do a bit better analysis of where these pinnacles were in the fix cycle. Because sorry, don't forget that this was an extra piece of work that was sitting on top of the existing activity that was going on. So while the task force was looking at this wedge of pinnacles, EPOS was still going on in the background.
So, yes, of
And
course.
that was the point that Dave made this morning.
Of course.
So we were trying to empty the swamp while the tap was still on at the top, and it was a virtually impossible task.
Exactly. And that's why I want to ask you why you're coming back to this on the 14th of May 2001.
It was just an admin clear-up, I think, of documents that were still sat at draft.
You see, because it coincides exactly with the date of a post office board meeting on the very same day, the 14th of May 2001, RMG 709, which speaks of error, that's error reconciliation activity, and horizon issues. Was this report of yours, with its dismal observations on EPOS, retrieved because of information that had been received from the post office at that time?
Not to my knowledge, no.
So the coincidence?
It is coincidence, yeah.
Just a coincidence. Right. Could I just ask you, please, to address matters, and again, I have permission for this, but address matters as to who is going to pay for RFIs in the event of prosecutions. We've seen a document put up on screen by Mr. Blake that Mr. Martin was suggesting that there might be a few hundred per annum. Mm-hmm. And you expected, you said, POCL to query the upsurge themselves.
I would have thought that was a prudent thing to do.
Mm. You were asked by Mr. Blake, did you ever ask POCL why there was this sudden increase? And then you said, I suppose we should have asked why this increase in numbers. Remember saying that?
Yeah.
You said to Mr. Blake a very short while ago that the Post Office really had no option but to use Horizon in the prosecution of its sub-postmasters.
Based on my understanding that the evidence of activities in the outlet was captured by the system, yes.
And so therefore, if it was demonstrated to be manifestly unreliable in certain respects, and it might only have been 1% or a fraction of 1%, the whole edifice would have come down in an enormous crash, wouldn't it?
If that was the case, then yes, I guess it would have done.
Of course it would, because obviously it would have been a matter of legitimate public interest. So what I'm going to suggest is that whether you were cited on this or not, it was not in ICL Fujitsu's best interest to ask that question, was it?
Well, that's an interesting one, as you might expect me to say. Was it in our best interest to ask about the integrity of the system, as demonstrated by the high number of prosecutions that were going on? I don't even know how many prosecutions were going on, but the high number of investigation requests that were being floated by Bob Martin suggested that there was a lot going on in the background that we didn't know about. Would it have been in our best interests? I guess in the interests of honesty and integrity, then yes, it would be.
Would have been disastrous reputationally for everyone concerned if, even if it was only 1% or a fraction of 1%, your system was manifestly unreliable.
Well, yeah, it would be, yeah.
Yeah. And we can't, well, I mean, we can if we need to. The counsel to the inquiry have been notified about various documents, but a defensive attitude, you would agree, has been adopted or was adopted by ICL in respect of criticisms of Horizon.
Where was that evidenced?
Well, I mean, for example, in the Cleverleys issue, where you were, as it were, deriding the opinions of the expert on behalf of the sub-postmistress in various negotiations with POCL. There was a defensive attitude as to system error and unreliability, wasn't there?
Can we get that document back up, please? I'm not happy with that.
Well, I think the document speaks for itself, Mr.
Yes, it does, doesn't
Mr.
it, sir?
Henry. I mean, I can read what it says. I don't think we need to.
No.
Yeah, but I'm not happy with the implications of what the gentleman
Well,
is saying.
I think Mr. Henry is referring to one part which stuck in my mind, where criticisms, I'm using that word in the general sense, were being made of the quality of the expert evidence. That's it, isn't it, Mr.
That's
Henry?
right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Well, I think, I'm sorry
No,
to harp on about this.
Bring it up then. Bring up the document.
It's
Well, I think it
FJ
was- I think it was
000
warranted.
Oh, no, well, that's a different
80715.
I don't think it's being suggested, or I'm not suggesting it if you think I am, that you were making up those criticisms.
No, I just didn't like the tone.
Oh, I see, all right.
I don't need to go to it, sir, in the
All
light
right.
of your observations. It's only if the gentleman would like to.
I've got the point you're both making. Let's put it like that.
I just want to return to, you see, that document that you, as it were, had an administrative catch-up about very quickly. No need to
Yeah.
put it on the screen. The 14th of May 2001, because very shortly or contemporaneously with that, one of the core participants I represent fell under suspicion, was subsequently prosecuted, and went to prison the following year. A 19-year-old girl sent to Holloway. Dealing with requests for unused material, or material RFIs, as you say, you were expressing concern about dodgy postmasters, and I realise that you...
Unfortunate term.
Of course, I don't refer to that pejoratively. You've apologised for the terminology. That was your understanding at the time. But you've been told that roughly it was going to be about 200 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, on the 24th of May 2000, a compromise was reached that 50 queries would fall within the contract, and then everything else, it would cost about 1,500 per day. Do you remember?
Yeah, well, I've seen the
Yes.
letters.
When that matter came to trial, Miss Felsted's trial, a request was made by your company that you then worked for £20,000 of the defence for Miss Felsted in relation to the provision of information. That wouldn't surprise you in the light of what had happened.
When did this happen?
That happened, well, she went to prison in August 2002. So I'm referring to the period of obviously between May 2000 and August 2002. May 2000, the agreement, prosecution in 2001, 2002, sent to prison August 2002. That wouldn't surprise you, would you?
Look, I'm not trying to duck the issue, but I wasn't on the project at that time.
No.
And when I came back, it wasn't my area to be responsible for.
You came back, however, in 2001.
Yeah, but it didn't. The role then didn't include the provision of audit data to the post office. That had been passed to customer services.
I see. So why then, if that wasn't your role, why are you therefore retrieving that report that I put to you at the very beginning of my questions?
Cleveley's.
Not Cleveley's, I'm talking about Miss Felsted. I'm talking about, if that wasn't your role, why were you, as an administrative catch-up, referring to a report that you and Mr. MacDonald had written in 1998, in May 2001?
It was just that, an administrative catch-up. That was all. There was nothing. There's nothing. No ulterior motive behind doing that.
What I want to suggest to you is that clearly, obviously, the problems in EPOS hadn't gone away, which is why you were pulling up that report for administrative catch-up on the 14th of May 2001.
That was just raising it to version 1 from version.
Sorry?
That was just raising it to version 1 from version 0.1. There was no change to content.
See?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what point you're trying to get
Well,
at.
what I'm trying to say is that obviously the problems with EPOS referred to therein had not been solved.
Well, clearly not.
Yes, I'm grateful. Could I ask you, please, to just consider this. You may not have been familiar. I mean, obviously, you mentioned in your statement that this was a massive exercise, and it was the largest non-military exercise in IT in Europe at that time.
I believe so, yeah.
Yes. And Mr. Martin is asking for about 200 cases a year. There were 19,000 post offices roughly at about that time. 1% by my O-level maths would come to 190, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think that that reflects upon the, as it were, the percentage error that was clearly, by that stage, unresolved?
I'm sorry, I'm not following you.
Well, the system bugs, errors and defects.
What's the number of post offices got to do with that?
Well, just the fact that if you've got a 1% error rate, you've got 19,000 post offices, you might get 190 referrals per annum for that reason.
But the requirements for the retrieval process were based on what we were told at the time by the Post Office Internal Audit and the BA Internal Audit, who were the authorised users of audit data. The Bob Martin's group were not on the horizon at all. I mean, you're probably not wrong in your 190, but at the time when we were putting together the requirements and specifying the system, it was based on what the customer said they wanted.
I see. Or not necessarily, and this is my final question, sir, and again, it's a matter upon which you and or the councils of the inquiry have given permission, not necessarily what the customer wanted. And I'm now moving to another subject, but what you were prepared to give them. In other words, an expert who could, as it were, give a sort of declaratory statement that the system was working properly. If you want to check it, it's going to cost you this amount of money. But essentially, somebody like Mr. Jenkins to come and, as it were, speak in a lapidary fashion that there's nothing wrong with this.
I can't answer to that, can I? It's
I
nothing
think
to do
that
with
is
me.
a-
I wasn't involved with
A
it.
very long comment, not a question. Mr.
Forgive me,
Henry.
sir. Final issue, sir. Final issue, and I promise you this, and I thank you for your indulgence. You're not a techie, sir.
No.
No. And Mr. Austin, your friend, appointed you.
Yes.
And at the time, Mr. Gareth Jenkins was your go-to guy for things that were technical.
If I wanted to know something, yes.
Yes. He doesn't appear to be that visible or prominent in the materials that were provided to you or the inquiry. Can you think of any reason for that?
No, not really. I mean, my involvement with Gareth was when I wanted it.
Right. Could I ask you, please, in conclusion, to go to FUJ 000 78284. And could we please go to page 23 of 32? I just observe it's December 1998, and the date is 15th of January 1998, but I think that must be 99, that there was a typo there, but it's immaterial. Could we go to live trials? Deliverables for live trials, etc., etc. High-level document extraction and filter document produced by Michelle Miles. You, sir, are mentioned, I'm not sure if you actually saw this, who specified the requirements for audit has confirmed that he does not have a requirement for GUI interfaces to any of these tools. He only requires batch tools. He may at a later date, after the process has been used for some time, ask for such enhancements. However, it was agreed at a meeting, etc., that the requirement for GUI interfaces would remain, etc., etc. Can you now remember what GUI stands for?
Yeah, graphic user interface.
Exactly. And they're more user-friendly for the user, aren't they?
Yeah, they're if you're going to start looking at the data and whacking it up on your screen so you can get an immediate feed of what that data is telling you off the record.
Absolutely. And Was this for the end user, a GUI interface for the end user, i.e. the sub-postmaster, or for somebody doing your audit?
No, the sub-postmaster would not have access to this
Right.
data.
So in other words, the GUI, which would have been allow you to get up more data, allow you to see it more clearly, be more analytical, that was, as it were, dismissed in preference for a much less sensitive batch tool.
Because that was what was needed at the time. That was what we were told was required at the time.
I see. But in view of the answer you gave me, GUI would have been more sensitive to detecting bugs, errors, and defects, wouldn't it?
No, it would just made the data easier to read on a screen, that's all. I mean, the data is still there. It's up to the users of the data to investigate and interpret it.
Well, thank you very, very much. Nothing further, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Holmes, during the course of answers you gave to Mr. Blake, I got the impression, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, that you've retained some of the documents over all these years.
Yes, I have.
Have you retained any of your witness statements you made?
Probably in the midst of the archive, yes.
I'm going to ask you, if you would, please, to dig them out and
Yeah.
send them to the inquiry.
Yes, I'll do
I'll
that.
send you a formal letter to that effect, all right?
Yeah, who do I send it to?
Or you'll be given the details.
Oh, all right, fine. Yeah,
Letter.
no, I can dig out what I've still got.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks very much. Thank you very much for your witness statement, and thank you for coming to give evidence to the inquiry.
You're welcome.
That it, Mr. Blake?
That is, sir. We have Mr. Scipione returning tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Jolly good. So 10 o'clock tomorrow morning it is.